The scent of jasmine hung heavy in the desert air as Sheikh Rashid Al-Zahrani stood at the window of his private quarters, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Behind him, the woman he'd been forced to marry just hours ago sat trembling on the edge of his bed, her wedding gown a cascade of ivory silk that seemed to mock the arrangement that had brought them together. He'd sworn to himself that this marriage would be nothing more than a political necessity, that he would maintain the iron control that had made him one of the most powerful men in the Middle East. But then he'd discovered something that shattered every wall he'd built around his heart, something that made him question everything he thought he knew about duty, desire, and the woman who was now his wife. Amira's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She clasped them together in her lap, trying to steady herself as she watched the broad shoulders of the man who was now her husband. Sheikh Rashid Al-Zahrani. Even his name carried weight, power, danger. She'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. The ruthless sheikh who'd taken control of his family's empire at 25 after his father's sudden death. The man who negotiated billion-dollar deals before breakfast and brought grown men to their knees with a single glance. The ruler who'd remained unmarried for 32 years, until political pressure and threats to his country's stability had forced his hand. And now she was his wife. A bride bought with treaties and promises, a pawn in a game played by men who cared nothing for her dreams or desires. "You don't have to be afraid of me." His voice cut through the silence, deep and rough, accented with the musical cadence of Arabic beneath his perfect English. Amira looked up, startled. Rashid had turned from the window, and in the lamplight, his features were softer than she'd expected. Strong, yes, devastatingly handsome in a way that made her breath catch. But there was something else there too, something almost like kindness in those dark eyes. "I'm not afraid," she lied, lifting her chin in a gesture of defiance that her grandmother had taught her. "Never show weakness, Habibti. Never let them see you break." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You're a terrible liar, Amira." The sound of her name in his mouth did something strange to her insides. She stood, her legs unsteady beneath the weight of her gown and the gold jewelry that marked her as a sheikh's bride. "What do you want from me?" Rashid moved closer, and Amira fought the urge to step back. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her head spin. "I want to know why you agreed to this marriage," he said quietly. "Your father gave me the political reasons, the tribal alliances, the trade agreements. But I want to know why you said yes." The question caught her off guard. In all the weeks of preparation, the endless negotiations and ceremonies, no one had ever asked her that. Not her father. Not her sisters, not even her best friend who'd helped her into this ridiculous dress. "My mother is sick," she heard herself say. "Breast cancer. Stage 4. The treatments in our country, they're not enough. But here, in your hospitals, with your doctors." Her voice cracked, and she hated herself for it. "You promised my father that she would receive the best care. That's why I said yes." Something shifted in Rashid's expression. The hardness she'd seen in all the photographs, all the news footage, seemed to crack open. He took another step closer, and this time Amira did step back, her legs hitting the edge of the bed. "Your mother will have everything she needs," he said, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. "I give you my word, Amira, she will survive this." "How can you promise that?" The words burst out of her, months of fear and desperation rising to the surface. "How can you promise something that even the doctors won't guarantee?" "Because I don't break my promises." He reached out, and before Amira could flinch away, his hand was on her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "And because I see now that you're not what I expected. You're not a political pawn or a duty to be endured. You're a daughter who loves her mother enough to marry a stranger. That kind of love, that kind of selflessness, it deserves to be honored." Amira's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This close, she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I don't understand you. I don't understand myself right now," Rashid admitted, and there was something almost vulnerable in his expression. His hand slid from her cheek to her neck, his fingers tangling gently in her hair. "I swore I would keep my distance. That this marriage would be in name only, a political arrangement and nothing more." But then what?" Amira whispered. His other hand came up to frame her face, and she saw something fierce and protective blaze to life in his eyes. But then I discovered something tonight that changes everything. Amira's breath caught. She knew what he meant. The palace physician, the mandatory examination, the truth that she hadn't thought mattered but apparently did. I didn't think, in this modern age, I didn't think that would be important to you. It's not what you think. Rashid's voice was low, intense. It's not about some archaic tradition or outdated sense of honor. It's about what it tells me about who you are. In a world where everyone takes and takes, where pleasure comes without thought or consequence, you chose differently. You saved yourself not for your husband, but because you wanted your first time to mean something. Because you valued yourself enough to wait for love. I didn't wait for love, Amira said, and she couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. I waited because I was afraid. Afraid of being used. Afraid of giving myself to someone who would throw me away after. And now I'm married to a man who doesn't love me, who sees me as nothing more than a political necessity. Look at me. Rashid's command was soft but irresistible. Amira raised her eyes to his, and what she saw there made her knees weak. I may not love you yet, Amira. But I will. I can feel it already, growing inside me like a seed that's just been watered. You, with your courage and your sacrifice and your terrible lies about not being afraid. You're going to undo me completely, aren't you? A laugh bubbled up from Amira's chest, part hysteria and part something that felt dangerously like hope. I don't know how to undo anyone. I barely know how to be a wife. Then we'll learn together. Rashid leaned down, his forehead resting against hers in a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. But not tonight. Tonight, I'm going to do something that I suspect will shock everyone who thinks they know me. What's that? I'm going to be a gentleman. He stepped back, and Amira felt the loss of his warmth like a physical blow. You married me to save your mother. You walked into this palace expecting a stranger who would use you and discard you. I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to court you, Amira. I'm going to win your heart before I claim your body. Amira stared at him, certain she'd misheard. You're going to court me. But we're already married. All the more reason to do it right. Rashid moved to a door she hadn't noticed before, one that apparently led to an adjoining room. Sleep well, wife. Tomorrow, your mother arrives from your homeland. I've already dispatched my personal physicians to bring her here safely. You did what? Amira's voice came out as barely a whisper. I made a promise, Rashid said simply. And I told you, I don't break my promises. He paused in the doorway, looking back at her with an expression that was equal parts determination and something that looked almost like wonder. You know what I think, Amira. I think this marriage that neither of us wanted might turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to both of us. The door closed behind him, leaving Amira alone in a room that suddenly felt too large and too empty. She sank onto the bed, her mind reeling. This wasn't how tonight was supposed to go. She'd braced herself for cold duty, for a clinical consummation of a loveless marriage. She'd armed herself with determination and resignation, ready to endure whatever came next for the sake of her mother's life. She hadn't prepared for kindness, for understanding, for a powerful sheikh who looked at her like she was precious, like she was worth courting despite the legal and political bonds that already tied them together. 3 months later, Amira stood in the palace gardens, watching the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of amber and rose. Her mother sat beside her on a cushioned bench, looking healthier than she had in over a year. The treatments were working. The cancer was in remission. And Amira's heart, which she'd thought she was guarding so carefully, had been stolen completely by a man who brought her flowers every morning and listened to her dreams every night. He's watching you again, her mother said with a knowing smile. He watches you constantly, Habibti. Like you might disappear if he looks away. Amira turned, and sure enough, there was Rashid standing at the palace entrance, his eyes locked on her with an intensity that still made her pulse race. 3 months of dinners and conversations. 3 months of held hands and stolen kisses. 3 months of falling in love with a man who'd kept his word and refused to rush her into anything more. She was ready now, more than ready. She wanted him with an ache that kept her awake at night. As if reading her thoughts, Rashid crossed the garden to her side. He offered his hand, and she took it without hesitation. Walk with me. They left her mother smiling on the bench and wandered down a path lined with night-blooming jasmine. When they were out of sight, Rashid pulled her into his arms, and Amira went willingly, her head resting against his chest. "I love you," she whispered. "I tried not to. I told myself it was impossible to love someone in an arranged marriage. But you made it impossible not to love you." Rashid's arms tightened around her. "I fell in love with you that first night," he confessed. "When you told me about your mother, when you showed me your heart so fearlessly. I knew then that I'd been waiting my whole life for you." Amira pulled back to look up at him. "Then stop being such a gentleman," she said, and watched his eyes darken with desire. "I'm ready, Rashid. I want you. I want this." That night, when Rashid finally lost the control he'd maintained for 3 long months, it wasn't with the ruthless sheikh the world knew. It was with a man who'd learned that true strength lay in kindness, that real power came from patience, and that the greatest conquest of all was winning the heart of a woman brave enough to sacrifice everything for love.